I joined the Reidvale committee because, well, I joined for a number of reasons, but it was when I got my flat in this area, which I love living in, by the way. I really love living over in this side of the street. The Reidvale area is from Duke Street to Reidvale Street and from Belgrove Street over to Millerston Street. So all the tenements on this side of the road are our stock. Since the 1970s, the organisation has redeveloped just over 1,000 tenements, and we still have 900 of them in community-controlled ownership. So when I moved into my flat here, I was absolutely delighted. I think I'm one of these people. I'll probably, never own my own house, and this is the next best thing for me. So I felt so pleased to be part of this community and so pleased to be part of this organisation, which does so much locally, that I thought I would join the committee and I would find out what was happening. When I did join, I was quite surprised to find that some of the people that are on our committee now were the original people, who had sold their houses back to the association in the 70s, and I'll go into how that happened just shortly. But I know we find it difficult to find new committee members, but a lot of our committee members have been with us for 25, 30 years. I'm one of the younger ones at 37 and I've been on since 2005. I'm still one of the newer committee members in their eyes. So, we're talking about that kind of longevity within our committee, and that absolute commitment that people are terrified, I think. People are terrified that what's going on at the moment, what you hear in the news, is going to happen again. People are going to be struggling again the same way they were 20, 30 years ago, and sometimes it's not that hard to imagine. I also joined the committee because I learned that the average age of a committee member in a housing association is 57 years old. And I found that absolutely astonishing, and I was 20 odds at the time when I joined, so I think even if I was a completely crap committee member, Reidvale would be delighted that I joined, because I brought the average age down quite significantly. And but the main reason I'm still on the committee, and it's hard work and it's a big commitment, but the main reason I'm still on it is because I get so pissed off when I see how, I'll say it, social housing is perceived in the news and in the press and in programmes in Channel 5 like Dogs on Benefits and benefit bins, and I just find it absolutely outrageous that people make these programmes and other people watch them and they think that that's what the sector's all about. And a lot of the stuff that community controlled housing associations do is incredible, and it's done with volunteers, and it's done to mitigate problems in communities, and it's done without any external support whatsoever. So it was that perception of associations in the press, and well, I've seen everyone's names get dragged through the mud when the bedroom tax came out, and that was another big issue which had to be fought there and then, because it was just so disgusting. And it was the thought that people who are perhaps living on benefits and they're living in these huge 2-3 bedroom flats alone that other people are paying for. The whole thing was just so divisive. It was time for these messages to get changed. So that's kind of why I do what I do at the association today. My committee are fantastic. They're really feisty. They're a scary bunch. There's about 11 of them at the moment, and they all bring different experience to the table. So there's myself. I've actually, I work for an arts organisation. I've got an arts background. I'm really quite interested in the policy side of things and making sure we're up to date with new legislation and new government policies that might affect us. There's my colleague Eddie, who is just all about community. He does a lot of he's the chair of the community engagement subcommittee. He's a force to be reckoned with. And you've got people like Irene, who has worked she led a dementia team up in Postle Park for Glasgow City Council, and is all about making sure that people feel included, no one's lonely, no one's sitting on their own. There's another lady who, Davina manages the credit union next door. So there's just this amazing range of people who in this bottom-down structure for the association come and meet about 4 times a month, and as and when, whenever, to discuss how we can keep the area running. But I did mention as well, we find it really difficult to get new committee members. And I think that's because, I guess if you were to move in here today, you'd think, yeah, this is all right, rent's really reasonable. If something's broken, I'll phone Michael at the office and he'll come and fix it. It's got to get fixed within 2 or 3 working days. And you would move in and you'd think, this is fine, this is absolutely fine. So I get frustrated with my committee because quite often they'll hark back to like the 70s and the 80s when you did sit-ins and you went out with placards and there was no social media and campaigning was very different, and they'll be quite ready to say, we done that in the 70s, we did that in the 80s, it didn't work, or it did work. And we have these arguments all the time, and I think if you were a new person that wanted to join a housing association committee, you realise that all these people have got so much history. Like Irene, I think her house is in one of my slides. They've sat in their house to stop it from getting demolished. And how, when people have set up a committee that many years ago, how can you compare that with now when people don't want to get bogged down and they want to help? People join a housing association to help their local area. They don't join to kind of get bogged down in what the Freedom of Information Act might mean for us. There's so much technical stuff and real responsibility that I don't think people are up for. And I guess there's a sense of complacency as well, whereas everything works fine. If there isn't any big perceived crisis, then people don't really feel the need to get out there and campaign or go to their committee and say, this is what needs to happen. So yeah, that's kind of my reasons for joining. Let's see what the next slide is. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about the history of Reidvale and this area, which I described as this big rectangle of tenements on this side of Duke Street. This is where we are sitting now in about 1974. So this area was horrendous. A lot of the flats weren't fit for purpose. There was a lot of rogue absentee landlordism. So do you know where landlords lived elsewhere? The tenants would pay the rents. They didn't care if your ceiling was hanging in or if you had a huge hole in your floor. People were still paying rent to these people anyway. Few owners dotted about as well, and then a lot of dereliction. What Eddie, again, who's on our committee, the guy who's all about community, he lived in Sword. He was brought up in Sword Street. I really wanted him to come with me today just so he could tell you a little bit about some of his stories, but he was telling me that in their flat in Sword Street, no one else lived in the block. So there was Eddie and his mum and dad and his 7 sisters, and they would just knock holes through into other rooms, and they had the luxury of running through this whole block of tenements. And it's so hard to imagine that, but for him that's like one of his key memories, which he really likes sharing with people. So it used to be, really grim, and that's just another shot. So that's, I think that's the corner of, you've got Sword Street here. I can't remember the Sword Street's there, isn't it? And then that's Sword Street. Good. And then there's that little short one next to the pub. So that's the little short street. That's where the corner unit is of this building, on that side. So all shored up, all falling to bits. And this is a kind of typical dwelling that would have been in this area at the time in the 1970s. So this would have been a single-end flat. Can't remember. Yeah, that's a shot from the other side. But, the bed recess would be here. There would be a shared toilet on the landing. that's that person's cooker. So their whole house would have just been in one room, you know, and you think, oh yeah, well it was the mid-70s. It's actually not that long ago, and it's really pretty bad. So that's another couple of just single ends. That's what flats in this area used to look like. And this is a quote from our first chairperson, who was a man called John Butterley. And John was just an ordinary wee guy. He lived in Bathgate Street, worked in the shipyards, and he'd lived in this area all his life. And although, you know, I've described it in quite a poor way, he was immensely proud to live here. And what happened was there was a council planning meeting, because this whole area was for the hammer. It was coming down. And a lot of our tenants, well, they would have just been tenants at the time, and John Butterley went to a local meeting with the planning department, and they said, this area is going to get demolished, and you're all going to get reallocated housing in Easter House. And some people were horrified. You know, back in the mid-70s, that's when Easter House was starting to get, I think there was that Billy Connolly song, The Desert with Windies, you know, that had, the buses wouldn't go out there, there was no shops. I'm not knocking Easter House now, I quite like Easter House, but at the time, people were like, no, we're not moving, no way. And John Butterley stood up at the meeting with the planners and he said, yous can go to Easter House if yous want, but I'm going to stay here. And what John did was he formed the first local committee that started to make the changes. And so he put that committee together in 1975. I've got a photo there. That's John there. Probably at one of those parties that you see good pictures of in the 80s that don't happen anymore. But that's maybe a community development thing. So yeah, just an ordinary wee guy, and he put the first committee together. And that was a group of local owners who had the misfortune at the time of owning a flat in this area and were watching the area fall to bits. So what all those people collectively done was they sold their flats back to the association. And that meant that they could start to, you know, they had a little bit of capital, but what they also done was they persuaded other owners in the area to sell their flats back to the association as well. And with that little bit of capital that they had, they started to, you know, redevelop a couple of flats. There's a wee couple moving out. They started to redevelop a couple of flats, and that involved you know, sandblasting, putting a toilet inside the actual flat as opposed to out the back or in the landing, and you know, just fitting little kitchens and things as well. And as soon as they started to do that, more people in this area thought, well, I want a piece of that action. I'd quite like that as well. So the act of, there was no council support at the time, because or government support, because what they thought was that area should be demolished, it should just come down. So people had to do it on their own, and they did do it on their own. And here's a little couple. I just like that wee lady getting ready to move out of that flat and move into one of the new refurbished ones. This is just down at the corner of Reidvale Street and Sword Street. I keep doing that. Reidvale Street and Sword Street. And this was the first building in the area to get sandblasted. And you can see all the tenements around. It's the same buildings, it's the same houses, but they were all black because of the pollution. So our little committee at the time managed to persuade, they actually managed to persuade the council at the time, can you do a test and sandblast our building and see what it looks like? And that's that beautiful red sandstone was underneath, and nobody knew that the tenements looked like that around here. So that again led to a little bit of development grant that the association had then demonstrated that they could manage and handle, and that, you know, it led to further redevelopment. I just thought I'd put this awful, but well, this was the picture that sealed the deal for a lot of people that owned a flat, but were maybe reluctant about selling it back to the association. And you know, if someone said to you, "You can have this," this is what sealed the deal for a lot of the people who were living in the area at the time. So that was the first ever fitted bathroom in the Reidvale area, which is quite something. I'm slightly disappointed. In my memory, the suite was either puce or avocado. I'm disappointed that it's brown, but it's still horrible. And then this is Thompson Street School. This is my living room. Actually looks out into the front of this building. And I mentioned earlier my fellow committee member and friend Irene had done a sit-in because this building was going to get knocked down. So this was a functioning primary school until 1984. Then again, you know, the council was like, well, we can't afford to run it anymore, we're just going to close it. You still see this now. You see these buildings all over the city, schools that are getting mothballed until they can either fall down or until the council can sell them on to a private developer. It's just happened up in Hanson Street a few weeks ago. Kim Long, the local councillor, done a really good job of raising awareness about this problem. But it used to happen in the 80s as well. Do you know, it's like the same old tricks. So this building, this beautiful school got closed and it was left to get ruined, and then local tenants heard that that was going to get demolished as well. So they broke in and staged a sit-in, and there was a big negotiation with the council, and the council sold it to the association for £1. And you know, it's peppercorn rent. The association had to redevelop the building, which they did in like a number of stages over the next 3 or 4 years, and that's it now, and it's flats. But that's, if you did see the documentary about this area, History of Our Street, that's Irene's house there. And Irene's not to be messed with either. But Irene, in the documentary, there's a really good moment where she says, well, where would you rather live, here or here? And she points at the tower blocks, the Gallagate sisters, which have since been demolished. And it's, you know, that's our big point. You've got to do it yourself, otherwise we would have ended up in high-rise like that. I'm not knocking high-rise either. We've lived in high-rise flats before as well. So, but it was a really good point Irene made where this has been designed and kept for the community. So yeah, I've just got a couple of pictures of, these are gala days. Gala days used to be rife in the area. I don't think I've seen a gala day for quite some time, but there's always been a real appetite for that additional stuff. So I've talked a lot about the housing and how improving the housing improved the area, but the committee at Reidvale realised quite quickly, if you just make houses and rent them out, you know, you're just another landlord. You don't really know who's living here. You don't know what they need. You can't mitigate problems in the area. So we've got where the Reidvale office is, that's the Reidvale Neighbourhood Centre, and it's, you know, it's had a number of various reincarnations over the years. But the Neighbourhood Centre is used to host a number of classes for local adults, local children. It's got a community cafe in it. There's just an area where teenagers can spend their time at night. There's also there's the Reidvale Adventure Play area just along the road, and that's an award-winning facility for younger children, and that's been there maybe for nearly 25 years now as well. There's the allotments at the bottom of the street there. That's one of our more recent initiatives. The allotments were, at the time, back in 2008, they were the first allotments purpose-built allotments to be built in Glasgow for the last 60 years. So that was, it was just about using land in the area, which if we didn't use it, someone else would, and they'd probably use it for something which didn't benefit our tenants or benefit our community whatsoever. So, you know, there's another initiative that we have in the local area. I wouldn't say you see hundreds of police about, but £1 from every resident's rent pays police overtime. And there's maybe another argument there about people paying for public service, but that's something that we decided to do for a period of time. I think we're probably going to stop it soon because the police patrolling is different, but that's something we decided to do at a time when there was a lot of trouble with people hanging about in the streets at night and tenants not feeling safe, and that's how we tackled it. So a lot of the initiatives that happen within the area happen because that problem came about and it had to be solved. I put this quote in because, and I'm really gutted I forgot to bring them with me, but our director, who retired 2 years ago, Rob Joyner, wrote a little book, and he wrote a book about the first 25 years of the association. And, it was just kind of a lot of what I've told you, but there was this quote in it as well, which is very unlike Rob, and it's very unlike the rest of the content in the book. But I just thought I'd put it in there for today because Rob was a real innovator. He was a real thinker. And I've never known another housing association director like Rob, and I think Rob Joyner's led Reidvale down a path that perhaps a lot of other associations haven't gone down. I just thought I'd put this picture in as well. That's John Butterley again, and the supported living, which is the building behind this one, was named after John because basically he saved the area from the hammer, but he didn't know that the building was going to be named after him when he pulled the little curtain. I think he thought it'd be called the Queen Elizabeth Old Folks Home or something, and it wasn't. It was named after him. So it's just, I wanted to demonstrate the legacy that these people and what they've done for us have through the community.